January 1944, Allied troops finally reached the foot of the Gustav Line, staring up at Monte Cassino rising steep and silent above them. The medieval monastery loomed like an indifferent witness to suffering, half veiled by drifting fog. Rain hammered helmets and soaked greatcoats until they clung like ice. Artillery thunder rolled across the valley, reminding every man that taking this mountain would demand a price, far higher than anyone dared admit aloud, for the German Fallschirmjäger entrenched around Cassino. The mountain was a fortress crafted by nature and perfected by engineering. Machine gun nests were carved directly into rock walls. Firing lanes overlapped with surgical precision, and hidden tunnels allowed defenders to disappear like ghosts. Snipers watched every path through ruined stone. Allied commanders knew that breaching these defenses would require not only firepower but relentless human endurance pushed beyond reason. When New Zealand infantry began their advance, the town erupted into chaos. Mortar rained down in deafening bursts, turning buildings into fountains of stone and dust. Entire sections of streets collapsed under the bombardment, trapping men beneath rubble. Survivors pressed against shattered walls, lungs burning, eyes stinging from powdered masonry. Each intersection became a gamble, where even a single exposed step might draw the unseen. Crack of a German rifle. Under cover of darkness, Indian division troops attempted a daring climb along the steep ravines flanking Cassino. Rain poured in relentless sheets, soaking turbans and helmets alike. Boots slipped on slick limestone as soldiers hauled themselves upward on ropes. Suddenly, German flares burst overhead, bathing the slope in harsh white light. Machine guns roared from above, and echoes thundered across the cliffs as men scrambled for any scrap of cover they could find. By dawn, a suffocating fog draped itself over the mountains. Visibility shrank to mere meters, yet the battle continued blindly. Artillery shells detonated inside the mist with terrifying unpredictability, shredding trees and spraying jagged fragments across the slopes. Gurkha patrols advanced through narrow goat trails, shadows moving in disciplined silence, until German fire erupted from concealed bunkers, forcing a desperate retreat down paths now slick with mud. Rain and blood inside the ruins of Cassino town. Allied engineers fought a quiet, deadly battle of their own. Every collapsed doorway hid a trap mines under loose stones, tripwires strung across dark corridors, grenades rigged behind fallen beams. The Fallschirmjäger had turned the rubble into a labyrinth engineered to kill. Engineers worked by shaking lamplight, fingers trembling as they disarmed explosives, knowing a single mistake could erase an entire squad in an instant. Above them, the untouched monastery stood like a solemn guardian. No Allied shell had struck it, respecting cultural heritage. Yet German observers near its grounds used the vantage to direct devastating fire. Every Allied movement felt anticipated, as though the heights themselves whispered warnings to the defenders. Rumors spread through the ranks that the monastery watched the battlefield, choosing who advanced and who vanished beneath the next precise German barrage. Supplies grew scarce, as mud consumed vehicles and trails became rivers of sludge. Mules slipped off narrow ridges, carrying precious ammunition into the abyss. Still, forward companies clung to shattered positions, sleeping beside fallen comrades because no safer shelter existed. Rats thrived in the wreckage, feeding on abandoned rations and bodies alike. The stench of decay mixed with damp earth, reminding every soldier that Monte Cassino cared for nothing living. At dusk, Allied artillery unleashed a barrage meant to crush German resistance. The mountains roared beneath thousands of shells, flames erupting from broken walls. Yet when the guns fell silent, the Fallschirmjäger resumed firing with chilling precision. Snipers targeted officers first, their shots echoing like punctuation marks in the smoky air. Men whispered that German marksmen could shoot through firing slits no wider than a fist. Fear settled like dust over every trench. Night patrols crawled through Cassino's ruins, navigating rubble lit only by moonlight reflected in puddles. The smell of cordite and soaked stone lingered everywhere. Sometimes patrols found positions empty. Other times grenades exploded from pitch-black alleys without warning. Few returned with their full numbers. Those who did brought grim reports. Tunnels that seemed alive with enemy movements. Corridors where shadows shifted, and streets so deadly no unit dared cross them again. Repeated assaults turned Cassino into a landscape barely recognizable as a town. Walls stood at crooked angles, stairs led to empty sky, and streets vanished into pits created by direct hits. Allied platoons rotated through these ruins, each group returning more hollow-eyed than the last. German defenders moved with uncanny discipline, shifting positions before every bombardment. The result was a battle where progress came in meters, traded for dozens of bleeding bodies. When Allied tanks attempted to push through the narrow streets, the terrain betrayed them. Rubble blocked their advance, forcing armor to funnel into predictable paths. German anti-tank guns, hidden behind collapsed facades, opened fire with devastating accuracy. Shells punched through steel plates, sending flames roaring from hatches. Infantry abandoning burning tanks scattered into alleys already zeroed in by mortar. The town became a steel graveyard, marked by twisted tracks and smoldering turrets. Rain resumed, heavier than before, turning shattered streets into brown rivers. Dead mules floated beside splintered beams. Stretchers bogged down in mud, medics slipping as they dragged wounded men to makeshift shelters. German snipers exploited every pause in movement, their rifles cracking from unreachable nests. The wounded cried for water, morphine, or mothers who could no longer hear them. Monte Cassino swallowed those voices, keeping them like secrets buried beneath its stones. On the slopes above, polished the Second Corps prepared for their own assault. Veterans of exile and defeat, they marched with grim determination, each man knowing Cassino was a chance to reclaim honor stolen by war. They trained artillery along ridgelines, measuring distances with meticulous care. The Germans braced themselves, recognizing the hardened resolve of troops who had known loss long before reaching Italy. The mountains seemed to tense, awaiting the inevitable collision. Night brought no peace. The monastery cast a long shadow across the valley, broken only by burning vehicles scattered like dying embers. Artillery flashes illuminated contorted faces, fear, exhaustion, defiance etched into every soldier. Radios crackled with fragmented orders drowned by static. Some men prayed. Others cursed the mountain that refused to yield. The distant chanting of monks mixed eerily with the rumble of warfare, as though heaven and hell clashed over the same ridge. Amid the ruins, Allied scouts discovered German bunkers carved deep into the hillside, reinforced with steel beams and camouflaged with debris. Clearing them required flamethrowers and grenades tossed through narrow slits. The fighting inside was suffocating close quarters, where screams echoed and visibility shrank to orange firelight and shadows. Those who survived emerged coated in soot and dust, trembling from adrenaline. Knowing another bunker waited only a few meters ahead, German defenders, though outnumbered, fought with fierce resolve. Many were young paratroopers trained for airborne assaults, but repurposed into mountain defenders. Letters found on fallen soldiers spoke of homes reduced to rubble, families scattered across Europe. They fought not for the monastery, some said, but because retreat meant surrendering the last shreds of purpose anchoring them to a world dissolving in chaos. Their bullets carried both duty and desperation. As February began, Allied commanders authorized the bombing many had hoped to avoid. Waves of American bombers roared overhead, releasing tons of explosives onto the ancient monastery. The sky turned black with smoke that coiled upward like mourning cloth. When the dust settled, only jagged walls remained. Instead of breaking German morale, the destruction provided them new defensive positions within the rubble. The monastery, once sacred, became a fortress of stone and sorrow. The bombardment also buried civilians who had sought refuge within the monastery's walls. Survivors stumbled into Allied lines days later, dazed, bleeding, carrying children wrapped in blankets gray with dust. Their stories spread quickly among soldiers, fueling guilt and anger in equal measure. Cassino had become a place where tragedy layered upon tragedy, each decision creating ripples of suffering that neither side could fully control or undo. After the bombing, the battlefield shifted again. Smoke lingered for days, clinging to uniforms and stinging eyes. German forces reoccupied the ruins with renewed tenacity. Allied troops pushed forward, stepping over smoldering stones that still radiated heat. Every corner revealed new ambushes, and every advance triggered another counterattack. Cassino had ceased to be a simple military objective. It had become a symbol of endurance where both armies bled for every inch gained. As March approached, Monte Cassino resembled the surface of another world. Craters overlapped. Trees were reduced to blackened spears, and the air tasted of ash. Allied units rotated through front lines so often that days blurred together. German spotters, hidden among the monastery's shattered stones, continued directing precise fire. Every Allied gain evaporated beneath counterattacks that arrived with ruthless timing, leaving soldiers convinced the mountain itself resisted them. Medical stations overflowed as stretcher after stretcher arrived, each carrying another victim of shrapnel or sniper fire. Surgeons worked under dim lanterns, sleeves soaked with blood, their hands trembling only when they paused long enough to feel exhaustion. Outside, chaplains whispered prayers over men too wounded to speak. The screams, the silence, and the metallic scent of blood mixed into a chorus no one could forget. Not even decades later, attempts to seize the high ground faltered repeatedly. Allied platoons advanced along ridges only to be met by coordinated machine gun bursts echoing off the cliffs. Communication wires snapped under shellfire, forcing runners to brave open terrain with messages clutched to their chests. Many never returned. Commanders struggled to adapt, realizing the Fallschirmjäger, defended with the precision of veterans who believed each meter of soil must be held to their final breath. Rainstorms battered both armies, transforming trenches into cold, waist-deep lakes. Men slept standing up to avoid drowning in their own dugouts. Rifles rusted overnight, boots dissolved into tatters, and blankets clung to skin like frozen slabs. Yet neither army yielded. German defenders rationed their dwindling supplies with iron discipline, while Allied units endured misery with grim resolve. Convinced that breaking Cassino was the only way to reach Rome, during scattered lulls, soldiers encountered fragments of humanity hidden among ruins, an abandoned rosary glimmering in dust, a child's doll missing its head, a monk's torn manuscript fluttering in wind. These small remnants reminded troops that Cassino had once been a place of peace before war twisted it into a crucible. Some men pocketed the relics as talismans, hoping they would shield them from the next blast or sniper's bullet. German paratroopers also suffered immensely. Their supply lines shrank as Allied artillery pounded access routes. Many fought while wounded, wrapping bandages beneath their uniforms and refusing evacuation. Letters home went unanswered. Rumors circulated that relief forces might never arrive. Still, they fought on, driven by camaraderie and pride in their elite status. To them, Cassino was a trial by fire, and retreat was a shame worse than death. When Allied attempts to bypass the town failed, commanders authorized the use of heavy bombers on remaining German strongpoints. The bombardments shook the valley like an earthquake, sending dust clouds rolling down slopes. Yet the ruins often shielded defenders rather than destroying them. The paratroopers emerged from smashed cellars coughing but alive, repositioning machine guns atop fresh piles of rubble. Allied troops realized Cassino had become a fortress nobody intended to build. In the midst of chaos, small acts of bravery kept units moving. Runners dashed through open plazas under fire to restore broken communications. Medics crawled toward wounded men despite machine gun bursts, clipping stones around them. Engineers cleared mines with shaking hands while shells thundered overhead. These nameless actions accumulated into momentum, slow, fragile, but essential. Without them, the entire Allied effort might have collapsed beneath exhaustion and despair. Even so, morale fluctuated dangerously. Some soldiers confided that Cassino felt cursed, as if every misstep carried divine punishment. Others believed the monastery, shattered as it was, still exerted an uncanny influence over the battlefield. At night, the wind whispered through broken arches, producing eerie tones that unsettled hardened veterans. These psychological wounds grew heavier than physical ones, carving invisible scars into every man who passed through the valley. By early April, Allied leaders prepared for a massive coordinated offensive involving British, Indian, Polish, and New Zealand units. Artillery charts were redrawn, supply routes reinforced, and infantry drilled on navigating the labyrinth of ruins. Commanders hoped synchronized assaults could finally overwhelm German defenses. Yet the Fallschirmjäger, aware of the buildup, fortified deeper into rubble, tightening their grip on key positions. Both sides understood the final clash was approaching, and it would be catastrophic. When the offensive began, the valley erupted under the heaviest artillery bombardment yet unleashed in Italy. Hundreds of Allied guns fired in relentless waves, shaking the ground as dust rose in choking clouds. Infantry advanced behind the barrage, racing across exposed terrain before German defenders could re-emerge. Despite the thunderous fire, many positions remained intact, hidden beneath layers of rubble. The men pressed forward anyway. Knowing hesitation meant certain death, fierce house-to-house fighting consumed what remained of Cassino's streets. Allied troops blasted gaps through walls to avoid open intersections controlled by machine guns. German paratroopers countered with grenades rolled down stairwells and sniper shots from shattered balconies. Each building became a separate battlefield where victory was measured in floors and doorways. By nightfall, smoke hung so thick that soldiers recognized allies only by whispered passwords. Engineers worked tirelessly to clear paths for armor, laying steel planks across collapsed roads and removing mines buried under debris. The arrival of tanks provided desperately needed support, their cannons flattening fortified positions. But progress was slow. Rubble frequently trapped their treads, forcing crews to fight on foot. Still, every meter gained felt monumental, a shift in momentum after months of stagnation. Soldiers clung to that hope like a lifeline. On the heights above town, polished the Second Corps launched their long-awaited assault. Under heavy fire, they climbed steep ridges, using bayonets and grenades to dislodge Germans from pillboxes. Casualties mounted rapidly, yet the Poles pressed on with unbreakable determination. Many had lost their homeland early in the war and saw Cassino as a symbolic stand. Their battle cries echoed across the cliffs as they advanced through smoke and shattered rock. German resistance grew increasingly desperate. Radio intercepts revealed shortages of ammunition, food, and medical supplies. Wounded men lay in makeshift shelters carved into stone, tended by comrades who refused to abandon them. Still, the Fallschirmjäger fought with astonishing tenacity, believing withdrawal would dishonor their dead. Their commander encouraged them, insisting every hour they held delayed Allied entry into the Liri Valley and into the road toward Rome. For Allied troops, the final push felt like an endless nightmare. Explosions deafened them. Dust blinded them. Exhaustion weighed down every step. Survivors described the battlefield as a living organism breathing smoke, trembling under bombardments, swallowing men without warning. Yet, despite terror and fatigue, squads kept advancing. They moved with the grim understanding that Cassino had consumed too many lives already. Turning back would condemn even more. When the Poles finally breached the upper defenses, the German line began to fracture. A handful of paratroopers attempted counterattacks, but were pushed back by overwhelming fire. Communication between German units collapsed as Allied forces seized key observation posts. By midday, white flags appeared in isolated pockets, not out of surrender to fear, but surrender to inevitability. The fortress of Cassino, undefeated for months, was beginning to crumble at last. Inside the monastery ruins, Allied patrols advanced cautiously, finding only remnants of German positions. Scorched helmets, burnt maps, and shattered rifles littered the ancient stones. A few wounded paratroopers remained, too injured to flee. Medics treated them quietly, aware that these same men had inflicted heavy losses. The atmosphere was surreal victory laced with sorrow. As though the monastery mourned what war had forced upon its sacred grounds. By May 18, 1944, the Polish flag rose above the ruins, signaling the end of the Battle of Monte Cassino. Soldiers watched in exhausted silence as the banner caught the wind. Many wept, some from relief, others for friends who would never see the moment. The valley below lay scarred beyond recognition. Yet the raising of that flag marked a turning point, breaking the Gustav line and opening the path to Rome. Even in triumph, the cost was staggering. More than 50,000 Allied and German soldiers had fallen, and the ancient monastery lay in ruins. Survivors carried those memories for the rest of their lives, haunted by echoes of artillery and the faces of comrades lost in mud and smoke. Monte Cassino became more than a battle, it became a symbol of sacrifice, endurance, and the terrible price of reclaiming freedom brick by brick. In the days following the monastery's fall, Allied units combed through remaining pockets of resistance across the ridges. Some German paratroopers surrendered quietly, too exhausted to fight, while others refused until they were physically overrun. Many emerged from cellars, blinking against sunlight for the first time in weeks. Their gaunt faces, hollow eyes, and trembling hands revealed the brutal cost of holding Casino for so long. POW cages filled quickly as surviving Fallschirmjäger were processed by military police. Though disciplined in defeat, their silence spoke louder than defiance. Allied guards were struck by their youth. Many looked barely older than boys who should have been in school, not dug into a mountain of rubble. Medics treated wounds without prejudice. War had made suffering a universal language understood by all sides. Meanwhile, Allied soldiers scavenged for usable equipment among the ruins. Rifles, helmets, and ammunition lay scattered beneath collapsed stone. Engineers marked unsafe areas where unexploded shells lurked. In the monastery courtyard, chaplains held brief services for the fallen of every nation. The contrast was stark. Ancient sacred walls shattered by modern steel, creating a haunting silence that seemed to apologize for what humanity had done. The road to Rome now lay open. Columns of Allied armor rolled south of Cassino, engines rumbling across terrain still littered with craters. Infantry marched behind them, boots sinking into mud soaked with months of blood. Yet even as progress resumed, many soldiers carried invisible weight. They had survived one of the most punishing battles of the Italian campaign, but part of them remained on that mountain. Buried with those who did not return. Italian civilians slowly emerged from hiding, stumbling into daylight with faces pale from hunger and fear. Families searched for missing relatives among ruins, calling names that the wind carried away. Allied units distributed rations and medical aid, though resources were strained. For many civilians, Cassino had become a nightmare landscape of broken homes, lost livelihoods, and memories too painful to voice aloud. Despite victory, controversy grew around the bombing of the monastery. Historians and officers debated whether it had been necessary or a tragic miscalculation. Some argued the Germans exploited its ruins for defense. Others believed preserving it might have avoided human tragedy. The debate would last decades, but for soldiers who fought below, the question felt distant. They knew only the chaos, not the politics guiding it. Among German POs, quiet camaraderie formed with Allied guards, an unspoken recognition that both sides had endured the same brutality. Some prisoners shared stories of frostbitten nights, of fighting alongside fallen comrades, of receiving letters that never arrived. A few even expressed relief at capture, knowing survival chances were better behind wire than on collapsing front lines. War, it seemed, broke illusions evenly. For Allied troops, letters home became lifelines. Many wrote of exhaustion rather than heroism, describing the monastery as a place where courage blurred into necessity. Some confessed their fears, others their grief. A few enclosed small fragments of stone from the ruins as proof that they had stood on ground where countless lives had been spent in the struggle to push tyranny back one painful step at a time. As weeks passed, Allied photographers documented Cassino's aftermath. Images of cratered valleys, pulverized buildings, and scorched tanks circulated worldwide. The photographs shocked civilians who had only heard rumors of the battle's scale. Monte Cassino became a symbol, not just of victory, but of the unimaginable destruction modern warfare could unleash. The public saw what soldiers already knew, that triumph often looked indistinguishable from tragedy. Military planners studied Cassino intensely, analyzing how terrain, weather, and fortifications could transform even a small town into a fortress. Future operations incorporated lessons paid for with blood. Yet some soldiers joked darkly that no textbook could convey the reality of scaling cliffs under machine gun fire or crawling through rubble, where every stone hit a tripwire. Cassino taught strategies, but it also taught humility. Spring flowers began to bloom across the valley, standing defiantly between scorched craters. Their presence was surreal beauty daring to coexist with devastation. Soldiers paused to notice them, some plucking a single blossom to press between notebook pages. Nature's quiet resilience offered a brief reminder that life would continue, even if the men who witnessed Cassino were forever changed by what they had seen. Behind the lines, field hospitals worked tirelessly to stabilize wounded survivors. Nurses wrote names on bandages, doctors amputated shattered limbs, and support teams cataloged injuries so families would someday know what happened. Many patients drifted between nightmares and waking terror, convinced they still heard artillery echoing outside tents. Healing could mend bodies, but the mind carried scars far deeper. German PUAs began assisting with clearing debris under Allied supervision. Some worked silently, others exchanged cautious greetings with troops. A few stared at what remained of the monastery with visible grief. It had been a cultural treasure shared by both sides. The ruins reminded them not only of military defeat, but of how war desecrates even the places meant to inspire peace. As Allied forces advanced toward Rome, Cassino remained a logistical hub for a time. Its roads choked with supply convoys and troop movements. Maps marked it simply as a captured point, but for soldiers who fought there, Cassino was more than coordinates. They spoke of it in hushed tones as though naming it summoned ghosts. Every unit passing through felt the weight of history pressing against their shoulders. Military correspondents recorded testimonies from veterans of the battle. Some spoke reluctantly, voices cracking as they recalled impossible decisions and comrades lost in seconds. Others described German defenders with respect, acknowledging their skill and endurance. A few admitted they still felt guilt about the bombing. Each account added to a mosaic of perspectives that revealed how complex and deeply human the struggle at Cassino had been. Months later, when Rome finally fell, many soldiers credited Cassino as the true turning point. The breakthrough had cost unimaginable sacrifice, but it shattered the Gustav line and forced German retreat. Yet celebrations felt subdued. Men remembered faces rather than victories, friends buried beneath monastery stones, platoon mates whose helmets now hung on makeshift crosses. Triumph without them felt incomplete, muted by absence. Years after the war, veterans returned to Monte Cassino for memorials. Some searched for exact spots where friends had fallen, tracing outlines in the earth like archaeologists of their own trauma. Others gazed at the rebuilt monastery, its restored walls gleaming with forgiveness. Many wept quietly. They knew the new structure honored peace, but the ground beneath it still held echoes of their youth lost in fire and ruin. Historians would later call Monte Cassino one of the most grueling battles of the European theater. It combined mountain warfare, urban destruction, cultural tragedy, and relentless stalemate. But numbers and timelines never captured what soldiers remembered. The taste of dust, the stench of smoke, the chill of rain-soaked nights, and the crushing weight of orders demanding them to climb toward death again and again. For civilians who survived, Cassino became a permanent reminder of war's cruelty. Rebuilding took years, and scars remained in streets and families alike. Yet many spoke with gratitude toward Allied troops who shared rations, rescued children, and carried the wounded from collapsed shelters. Their stories, often lost in military records, revealed how compassion persisted even amid devastation. Today, Monte Cassino stands both rebuilt and wounded. The monastery gleams atop the mountain once more, while plaques honor the fallen of every nation. Veterans walk its halls knowing their footsteps echo over bones and memories buried deep below. The battle remains a symbol of endurance, sacrifice, and humanity's capacity to rebuild after destruction. Cassino endures, and so do the stories carved into its stones.